Hard Hat's all about showing up to play hard, doing what it takes to win.
If you want to cement legacy, win another.
More Luke.
He's your third center.
You don't want to pump him up too much, but it's hard not to.
This might surprise you, but this is maybe the most I've ever agreed with you.
Come on.
You love to hear it.
Hey, Bobby Manning here. Welcome to CLNS Media Studios for a live Garden Report. First time we're going live from the studio. Noah Dalzell's here, and we're going to talk about a bunch of stuff here today, but we'll throw it back to Saturday. We've had a couple days off now, and still trying to make sense of this whole Jrue Holiday Grizzlies loss where they leave him open and Payton Pritchard's closing over him. And Joe, as he said after that game, thinks the teams are going to try this again. So Pistons on deck on Thursday. They're much more limited in their personnel, so I don't think we're going to see this. Not a great defensive team, some good individual defenders, but this is what I said after the game, though, in terms of what this means going forward. I don't know how many teams can actually do that with Jaren Jackson playing in the middle, with a bunch of layers of defenders, scheme that played high, that left the corner open, and that Jrue couldn't take advantage of on that given night. I think there will be nights where he hits that shot. I think that the other teams aren't going to be able to have a roaming defender quite like Jackson. There'll be a few, and I'm sure they're going to see this down the line. But to me, 5th day and 7 nights, Grizzlies personnel, and just a brutal performance from Holiday in terms of shooting made that a unique circumstance. What do you think there?
I feel the same. I mean, again, I think we should never overreact to one game. And Holiday's he's been definitely down from last year's shooting. I don't think he's going to get back to his figures from last season, but they're going to be higher. Like, he's not going to shoot 8 of 26 on a given night. If given those exact same shots, like, that is not going to be the outcome again. And like we've said, if Jalen had missed his first 7 shots versus Golden State, like, that would have been a huge story. When you actually think about it, like, Jalen's not a great outside shooter. Like, that could have been a huge story. Now teams are going to start doing that. But all it took was one game where they actually looked, like, really stupid afterwards, where they almost were, like, a little bit embarrassed with the game plan. And that's that, right? So I think if Detroit comes out and does that to Jrue Holiday, like, chances are he's going to hit his shots. Because he's a good 3-point shooter. It's not like this is last year was a 1-year fluke. Like, he's around 40% if you look at the last 4 years of his career. So I think it's a non-story right now. That being said, we see like 2 or 3 of these games in a row. Now it's a much different conversation.
Well, I don't think it's a non-story because the shooting's down. Like you said, it probably won't get back to where it was last year. So he does become the guy you look at and say, all right, we're not as concerned about him beating us in droves from there or being able to do a ton with the ball in his hands offensively. And the biggest thing that we talked about after is how it impacted Jalen. And I know we talked to Jalen today at practice, and he likes the idea of Holiday shooting over and over again and them just taking those shots that are there for them. But to me, it was so intriguing that Joe pulled them because after the game, he says they love it. They want teams to do it again, bring it on. But they did come a point, 17 threes in, where they said, all right, let's get Pritchard in there. And I think that's going to be fascinating because those two have already traded off minutes more than you would have predicted going into this year because Pritchard's been so much more dangerous from 3.
Yeah, honestly, I interpreted Pritchard finishing that game out more of a reflection of like how well he was playing and how he actually like was one of the only players on the team that had the hot hand in that game. That it was more about him, I thought, than about Jrue being such a liability on the floor. Because at the end of the day, I do think there's a lot of things that you like about closing with Jrue. Ultimately, it was like a 1 or 2 possession game, and he is a guy that makes winning plays on the defensive end. And so I think if you can keep him out there, you do. But there have been games earlier this season where they didn't employ that strategy where Jrue didn't finish, like the Pacers game. And that was a weird one because, Nimi finished that game too. So Joe kind of rolled the dice with the whole lineup. But in general, I think that what it does show us is that the coaching staff is very comfortable making that substitution, closing with Pritchard over Holiday, if that's what the game calls for. And I felt that way similarly with Porzingis and Al Horford last year, where there were games where they closed with Al Horford, even though Porzingis is the guy that is the big acquisition and he's younger and he's closer to being an all-star and all that, because that's what that specific game called for. And I think we're going to continue to see that flexibility with the starting lineups.
So I sent these numbers to you. I was shocked when I looked at them because we know the shooting's down for Holiday this year, 34 from 3 or so after that last game. 30 in the corner where he was 60 last year, and I know some injury stuff going on there, maybe just fatigue from the last handful of years, how often he's played going back to the Olympics. But the Celtics offense gets 13 points worse per 100 this year when Holiday's on the floor compared to when he's off. Their shooting goes down 4%, effective field goal. Their offensive rebounding even goes down 9%, which I don't know what that's all about because he's been pretty good on the offensive glass. So their offense is taking a dive. What they still benefit, obviously, from is the defense, 4 points better compared to when he's on and off, 3-point worse shooting for the opponents, 4% worse offensive rebounding for the opponents. So there's a lot of noise happening here, lineup combinations, guys in and out of the lineup. But that's the third percentile, them being 13 points per 100 worse with Holiday on the floor compared to off. And when you compare that to Pritchard's been one of the biggest boosts to his team on the court compared to off. The Celtics are 7 points better per 100 with Pritchard on offense compared to off. That's the 85th percentile. So it's a good problem to have, right? You can rest Holiday, you can play Pritchard, you can close with Pritchard if Holiday's struggling. But how often are we going to see that become a trade-off late this year, considering the way that they're playing?
I think we're going to see it pretty often. I think there's going to be games. I mean, if Pritchard's offensive success, which is what we're seeing right now, if that continues, and even if it's a little bit less, because he's been really hot, obviously, but if he cools it down a little, but he's still performing at a similar level to what we're seeing right now, he's going to demand being in the game at close moments. I mean, we talked about that.
He's going to go to Joe and say, put me in.
Yeah, right. We talked about the Cavs game with Kenny Atkinson and that, he said, normally I wouldn't start fouling down by 3. That's just, I wouldn't start doing it at 25 seconds. But I did not want Payton Pritchard to hit a 3-point shot. And he specifically said Payton Pritchard because I think that there's a certain offensive element that he brings. And in that game, obviously, he was on his game. But, teams are afraid of him. Milwaukee said that, the same thing, right? So you do want to close with him when you can. We've seen in the past that he can also be exploited on the defensive end, and I know you have those numbers too. But it's not going to be a no-brainer. Just because Pritchard has the hot hand, you're going to sometimes want Holiday out there. I mean, I don't want us to get too carried away with this Holiday thing because think about last year's final series, last year's playoff series. I mean, that's just 6 months ago. And Holiday was the most important player on multiple occasions throughout that playoff run. And so there's going to consistently be a trade-off, but I think the good thing is that you can actually pick the guy who's going to better serve the team in that moment without worrying about someone's ego being bruised or he's on the Supermax and he's on a $8 million a year deal or whatever. So nobody's on a Supermax, but you know what I mean, the financial aspect as well. So yeah, I think eventually we might see more and more Pritchard, but right now I think for the most part we can expect Holiday to play a similar role that he did last year.
Yeah, and the defense does get much worse with Pritchard out there. I don't know if that's because of him, because I do feel like he's defended well this year. 46% opponents are shooting against him, but the defense 13 points worse when he's on compared to off. I feel like that's just because he always plays with the bench instead of the starters.
But in that same vein, though, the Celtics offense benefits Pritchard. When Pritchard comes in, he's playing against backups. Mm-hmm. And Holiday's starting the game against the other team's starting guards. And so, that's the challenge with all these plus-minus numbers is the same thing about, all Holiday's offensive numbers looking worse is part of that's also the Celtics have had really slow starts as of late. He's always in that starting unit, so his numbers are taking a dip there. And I don't really get why their starts have been so bad. It was very different than how they were last year. And it's been with Porzingis back. It was without Porzingis. And so, that's another element where, I'm not sure that it completely tells us the full story, just, how much better offensively they are without Jrue. But as the season as we're deeper into the season, we're going to get, these numbers are going to mean more and more. Because we're now, almost a third of the way. So they're starting to matter.
Yeah, and we'll see how much Jrue can get back on track there and how much teams are able to exploit that. It does raise an interesting dilemma if it does keep happening, where they go with that. But we'll see what ultimately happens there. Beyond this year, though, and we've had this conversation a bunch of times, and I know you talked with your dad on your podcast about Pritchard becoming a starter, becoming more of a frontline guy in this league, whether it's going to happen here or elsewhere. And he's obviously on this $6 million a year deal until 2028 that I can't imagine them moving on from. It might be the best value contract.
Is that what it is? It's $6 million?
$6 million a year for the next 4 years.
Jeez.
So that's the best value contract in the NBA, or right up there if it's not. You're not moving on from that. He might want to leave. He might want a bigger deal, but we've seen them work through that in the past. The question I've always had here, once that $500 million bill gets due next year, and you're asking these questions of whether you can keep this team together or not, how do you resolve it? And to me, coming into this year, I felt like the most likely scenario, and I've even heard that you just take it year by year, you see how you're doing, and then you make decisions from there. But let's look at what just happened with Towns Randall in Minnesota. Towns Wolves probably could have waited a year to make that roster less expensive, but they got a good opportunity to bring in Randall and DiVincenzo in a pick, and they make that trade. Are you in that spot with Holiday a year from now? I mean, you just extended him. It was already an extension that, like, all right, 3-4 years, this might not look great, but you want to keep him here right now, and they saved money in the short term by doing it. And so he's still a valuable guy, right? If you put Holiday available for a trade this summer, people would want him. You know,
Right.
the teams that could
Of
afford
course,
him
yeah.
and that would benefit from him. There'd be enormous interest, and you might get a lot, right? And that's part of, like, keeping a sustainable team. So in my mind, coming into the year, I was like, all right, no one's pulled off a big trade to dump money in this new cap era. I think the way they're going to get off money ultimately is Porzingis coming off the books. Just let him go at that point. That's after the next year, you know, so 2 years from now. And then, you know, you make decisions from there. But Porzingis' $30 million coming off the books will be your big relief. Now I'm starting to think about it, and I'm like, all right, Pritchard becomes a starter maybe at that point if you think he's capable of it. You get a lot for Holiday. You move off that money. And maybe Porzingis comes off the books the next year and stays for less. And then maybe you can make the money work that way. It'd be tough to trade Jrue, especially if you win a championship after this year and he's a big part of it. But these are the kind of decisions you're going to have to make in this new landscape if you're not willing to pay $500 million.
So a couple of thoughts. First, part of it, what makes this conversation so challenging is that we have no idea what the new ownership's going to be. I think it might come sooner rather than later, some information on that. And right now we have no idea what their stance is going to be. Minnesota was the example that I was going to bring up as you were talking, because I feel like the Celtics are in a similar situation where there are 3 like starting level elite players in Holiday, Derek White, and Pritchard, and it's a luxury place to be in. To have this question of like, we love our 3 guards so much that how do we only have 2 on the floor at the end of games is a great place to be for a team. And it kind of reminds me of where Minnesota was last year with Kat and Naz Reid and Rudy Gobert, like having that challenge of like, okay, do we want the scoring punch? Do we want the rim protection? Like, they're all great things. And I think Minnesota traded too early because they're looking terrible right now. And they look like they made a colossal mistake. And Julius Randle is going to be a free agent. And, you know, everything that I'm seeing about that team, it's like you look back and they were all coming off of, for them, a really historic season, their best season in so long. They traded one of their centerpieces. If you do that trade too early, like you can't undo the damage that's done there. And so to me, if the Celtics win a championship this spring, which is what I would predict right now, although I know obviously it's early, a million things can happen, I don't see how you get rid of any of those pieces. And I would think that in an ownership deal, like that should be communicated and that should be made pretty clear that like you're going to try to keep this roster together despite all the limitations and all the disincentives that come with having the payroll be this high. If they lose, I think we're having a different conversation because then you can say, you know, we won the 1 year, whatever reason things went wrong this playoff run. And when you lose, like we've seen in the past what happens with after Miami, they were 1 game away from the finals and they kind of blew up that team in a lot of ways. They traded 3 rotation players, right? So I think when you lose, all of a sudden everything's back on the table. And so if they lost in the conference finals this year or, you know, whatever happened, I think you're looking at Holiday as a potential trade option. I think you're looking at Porzingis. Like I think you're starting to look at those guys because teams have a very short-term memory here. And when you don't, you end up being like Milwaukee where suddenly your one championship is kind of lasting for years and you're thinking like were there moves that could have been made way earlier or Denver. Like everybody knows one championship in this league doesn't mean you're now going to have years of sustained success. So I think what happens in this playoff run is going to determine a lot of who sticks around.
Even if you have a good offer next summer.
If you just won 2 championships, you can't trade a rotation player if you just won 2 championships. Like I don't care what they give you for Jrue Holiday. Like you have the potential to make the worst move a GM could make because then the next year they don't win and it's like the only thing that you know for sure is that you traded away one of the important players. Again, it's really hard to go back to back, so I'm not saying that as a shoe-in at all, but I don't know. I mean,
the challenge is, let's say this Pritchard tear continues all year.
Yeah.
And he's back to our conversation we just had. He's starting to play a little bit more often than Jrue or close a little more often than Jrue, or his effectiveness or consistency just looks more effective than Jrue for what they're trying to do. I don't think that's going to happen in a straight line. I think there's probably going to be ups and downs with both of them. But if that happens, and you have a good offer for Jrue this summer, and you have to get off some money, it's hard for me to think of another way to do it. Like, we'll be back at that Jalen conversation again, which I know none of us want to have.
Yeah.
So I think it's unfortunate, right? But I look at him, you have White, you have Pritchard, maybe you get a guard back, a rotation guard back. I'm trying to think of some names, and the only that would come to mind were like Beasley in Detroit or like Benedict Mathurin or something like that. I'd have to think about it, but let's say a good rotation guard's coming in who can replace him in the rotation. Pritchard's able to take a step up. You still have White. Like, to me, you have to keep Porzingis because of the fact that Horford's older and you're going to need someone who's younger and, you know, a longer-term option at that position. And I think with all his injuries, there's a chance you could get him for a bargain on his next deal. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I would explore what you could get from this offseason. It's a grueling decision.
They'll probably explore everything because that's what they do.
Right.
But if you get traded to Boston and you win 2 championships with Boston and you play well, I mean, this is assuming that he has like a normal playoff run.
No, it's tough, yeah.
And then you trade that player away, like, I think you can ruin your legacy as general manager, honestly.
I know, but you're the GM and
right. Maybe you don't care. Maybe you're a business person, and I'm thinking more from an emotional perspective but I would be very surprised. It's really hard. Yeah, you don't want to be that guy after winning a championship. You really don't. And it's so hard to be in that position where out of 30 NBA teams and maybe more in the future, you're the one that won back-to-back. Like, I think you take the L that you might have to endure in the future, and that might be a longer rebuild or, like, less assets in a few years. Because it's just so hard to be in the spot that you can't be thinking, like, you know, but if I keep Jrue Holiday on now, you know, what are we losing out in 3 years? Like, I think you got to just kind of capitalize.
Like you said, it'll be an
window.
It'll be an ownership thing. And so I think a Paglupa-led group would be more in favor of having that continuity, even if it does cost them big in the first year. You can finance the debt, whatever you need to do to make it work for 1 year. So I do think that's a viable scenario. But from a GM standpoint, and this is where it gets hard for Brad. Brad's made a million great moves, right? And they've all been slam dunks. It gets harder after this era of enormous success where you're like, all right, how much are we thinking about keeping this going? How much are we thinking about the long term there? And, you know, part of that consideration might be how big of a leap can Pritchard take. And I'm still not in a place where I'm like, oh, he's going to be an all-star. He's going to be a great starter in this league because he's still a second-unit guy, destroying second units. We're, 20-something games into this year. Is this going to carry all the way through, or is this just an enormous three-point shooting star for him? So that's going to depend on how you feel about it, too. And I know you're super high about him. Can he be a starter for this team long-term?
Absolutely. I mean, I think if Jrue was not on this team, he would be a viable starter right now. Or Derek was on this team, I think he'd be a viable starter right now, especially paired with an all-defensive guard with him to maybe help compensate a little bit defensively. But I don't think he's been a liability defensively. Obviously, there's going to be moments where it looks really bad from an eye test perspective because Giannis is picking on him, and it's like, okay, that he looks like a liability out there. But there's a lot of plus that he brings on the defensive end as well. His ball pressure, his speed.
Their turnover rate does go up. The opponent's turnover rate when he's in the game.
And then he's a very low turnover guy himself.
Yeah.
So, and that has always been true of him.
Would he be the point guard?
I don't know. I mean, right now is Derek the point guard, I guess?
I'd say so, yeah.
Yeah, I think they're going to continue to play, like,
through Tatum and Brown.
Some egalitarian, methodology there. But my thing with Pritchard, and the reason that I'm so high on him, is not because I think right now he's the best guard out there, or, like, I have this, like, inflated view of what Pritchard is capable of right now. He's one of those guys where I just have faith that he's going to get better. Like, just like he's gotten better year after year. Again, we hear everybody's a hard worker, the Jays are hard workers, Pritchard's a hard worker. It's hard to really kind of sift through all that and figure out who's actually working really hard, because we never hear somebody's, like, not a hard worker, you know? I wish we knew. That would be funny if we hear, like, oh, the guys were just like, oh, yeah, actually these 3 guys, like, just don't work hard. But with Pritchard, I know he's going to get better year after year. So I know people look at his age and they're like, okay, he's already, he's Tatum's age. He's in that class. Like, he's not a young guy with, like, but I don't think that's how he views it. And so where he's at right now is not where he's going to be in two seasons. I think he's going to continue to evolve and get better. And that's where a lot of my faith and belief comes in when it comes to him. And if you look at some of the moves driving to the basket, like, he did not have those moves in his bag 2 years ago. It's not just hitting threes. It's not just that. There's more to his bag now. And I think we're starting to see it, but he has said this on the record before, that he tells guys to practice for the role you don't currently have, but for the role you want in the future. And I think that's what we're seeing now, is, like, the fruits of all those years of work.
And his numbers go up the more he plays. I was looking back at it the year before he took over as a starter. Those numbers went up to, like, 50% field goal, 40% three-point shooting when he would play 30 to 40 minutes. So I think that is what precipitated that rise in minutes this year and the bigger role and all of that. And Joe talked about a little bit at practice today that they didn't set numbers in terms of what his role would be this year. It just happened in these games. And That's when you get into the summer. Let's say he does this for a full year somehow, 15, 20 points a game and 43% three-point shooting. That's when you're like, all right, do we need to give this guy a bigger role? Are we going to benefit from that? Are we better when he's on the floor? But it's all tough to decide off the sample we have right now. Want to give a shout out to one of our sponsors right now, PrizePicks. Right now, PrizePicks is the best place to get real money sports action with over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot up to win up to 200 times your cash. Run your game all season long on PrizePicks, America's #1 fantasy sports app. And right now you can make your holidays bigger and brighter with PrizePicks, the best place to get real money while watching all your favorite sports. And they now offer MasterCard for quick and easy deposits in your account this sports season. And it's just an amazing experience. And everybody's fantasy seasons are either about to end, like it's the last week coming up here and you're eliminated from the playoffs, or everybody's hurt on your team. So those are all great reasons to go over there. All you have to do is pick 2 or more players again, pick more or less on their stat projections, and you have a team for that football weekend or basketball, whatever it might be, hockey. You can even combine leagues. It's an amazing experience over there. So right now, again, the holiday season, they're giving away 2 free picks in December, and they're giving away $30+ million in rewards during Picksmas. So sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need a win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. Always weekly promotions going on that lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday. PrizePicks discount select player projections up to 25%. Even more value in your lineups on Tuesdays. So go check that out as well. And download the app today. Again, $50 instantly when you can use the code CLNS. All you got to do is play a $5 lineup. That's your first $5 lineup. Use the code CLNS to get $50 instantly. PrizePicks, run your game. So Noah mentioned this to me coming in, and I haven't thought too much about it. I have thought in like the background of my mind, like, all right, White's going to be in play for that All-Star this year because they've been so good, 1. And 2, he's been great. And 3, everybody's hurt. Yeah. Everybody's ineligible or players haven't been playing as well, and the East just stinks. So he's going to have a path to getting in here. But you actually rattle it off, and it will be a little more challenging for him, you were saying this coming in, than we think, just because he hasn't blown the stat sheet away, especially over the last 4 games or so here. And he hurt his foot. I know he's on the injury report again with the foot sprain, so I don't know how much that's impacting him, but he hasn't been the same guy the last 4 games. Still 39% from 3 for the season on huge volume. Scoring's up to 17 a game. His assists are right where they were last year. So is he going to get in? We can go through the list here, but does your gut tell you he's going to get in or not?
I don't think so. I felt pretty confident about it a few weeks ago, and that's why I've been checking up on this take because I'd like to see if my takes are aging well. But I think in this,
was that a prediction for you?
That was one of my predictions.
Okay.
Yeah, I was yelling about it a couple weeks ago. I think the issue is that he's just not putting up the numbers, and ultimately scoring is like the #1 determinant of being in the All-Star game. The pathway is there. I mean, there's been a ridiculous amount of injuries in the East. There are so many guys like Paolo and Scotty Barnes and Franz Wagner and who else? We talked about other guys that are just LaMelo, who I think LaMelo might end up reaching the threshold. I don't know with the extent of his current injury. But the pathway is there just to have like 4 probable shoo-ins or very likely candidates eliminated. This is the year to do it. Not to mention the fact that there's another month left, and with the way things are happening with NBA right now, it's probably going to be other stuff, unfortunately. But yeah, he's not going to be able to get away with 10-point nights on a regular basis, and that's the stretch that he's currently in. But if he goes on a little bit of a scoring tier here, like if he goes, starts scoring in the 20s a little bit, or, has a 30-point game, like we know that he's capable of that. I think he's right back in that conversation. But right now he's a little bit out of it, just looking at that full list that we came up with.
Yeah, in the selection process, 5 starters, obviously, 2 guards.
And the starters is just fans.
Yep.
So
fans, players, media, but mostly fans. So off the bench, you're going to have 2 guards, 3 front court players, and 2 wild cards. They can be from either. Last year, I looked back on it, they had 6 guards total, so I think both, which makes sense, right? There's more good guards than front court guys. So starting-wise, and Tatum's a lock, right? Giannis
Last year
is
the
a
wild
lock.
cards were Scotty Barnes and Trae Young, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So starters, I think it's a lock. Tatum, Giannis, Mitchell,
I think just to recognize the Cavs season.
and then the two others,
Karl Anthony Towns is probably a lock.
and Brunson. Would they have two starters from the Knicks?
I don't know if Brunson. Karl Anthony Towns has been their best player this season.
Yeah. I mean, you're going to have two no matter what, right? Because it's going to be Brown and Tatum. It's going to be Garland and Mitchell. Or it's going to be Brunson and Towns. And so everyone's going to freak out if it's not the Celtics with two starters. But I do think someone else is going to have it. Do you go Mitchell and Garland? Garland's been really good. I don't know if he's going to win a fan vote, though.
No, I don't think so. I don't think they have that kind of motion with the.
Damian Lillard, he's enormously popular.
Yeah, I'm forgetting how it's just a fan vote, honestly. Like last year, Embiid and Maxey both started.
And I can't think of anyone else. We're talking Dame, Garland, and Jalen.
Jalen's not gonna
Force
start.
Jalen in there.
As a starter?
Yeah.
I don't think that he's going to get that.
And he is a guard in this category compared to the
I mean,
NBA.
let's say Jalen Brunson, just for popularity's sake. Although he actually didn't get that many votes last year. I remember looking at the vote count and being like, why does Halliburton have so many more votes than Jalen Brunson?
And Towns at the 5.
Towns at the 5. He's been one of the best players in the East this year. He really has. And I want to go back and rewatch our reaction video to that trade because I really can't remember what my take was.
I liked it for New York.
I think I did too.
He's too good.
But that has definitely aged where New York looks like the victor there. But that's besides the point. But forget the starters. Who else do we have in the mix here, just so the viewers know what we're working with?
All right, so if we're crossing off those 5, we're talking Jalen, we're talking Dame, we're talking Garland, Mobley. Allen has to be in that conversation as well, and that's a tough trade-off there. Trae Young, who's always on the periphery of this. Jalen Johnson, who I know you liked. Cam Thomas, who's been hurt of late. And there's a lot of injury guys. Hero, Cade Cunningham, who I'm going to be pushing for here. Nikola Vucevic, who we did not realize until Hollinger wrote about it. He's been going off in Chicago. Derek White, Tyrese Maxey, who's been hurt. Can't read my own handwriting. Scotty Barnes, who's been hurt and is hurt right now. Jordan Poole.
He's out.
Who you
I just
wanted.
threw. No, I don't think. A lot of these names that I threw out there, I was just trying to be thorough. That's not me saying that I think Jordan Poole should be an all-star.
And Jimmy Butler, who's been hurt a bunch.
Jimmy's not going to be an all-star. Jordan Poole's not going to be an all-star. Jalen Johnson's not going to be an all-star. The Cavs are not going to have 4 guys. That's ridiculous. If the Cavs have 4 guys, that's ridiculous. No team should ever have 4 guys.
Garland's going to be in.
Yeah,
so let's
Garland
circle him.
and Donovan, and then one of the bigs maybe, and probably
We
Evan
have
Mobley.
Mitchell in the starting lineup, so Dame
Yeah.
will be in. From there, I think the other lock would be, who'd you mention as a lock?
Jalen Brunson. I don't think
Brunson's
he's a lock.
in as a starter.
He's a lock. Yeah, he's a lock in general. I don't know if he's going to
Well,
start.
Melo would be a lock.
Oh,
but he's gonna miss
LaMelo
too
is
many-
enormously popular also.
He could be voted a
He
starter
is
and
always
replaced.
near the top of the list in popularity fan votes. He was near the top last year.
So we should plug him in just as a vote.
Just throw
and if
him in
he
as a
misses
starter
it-
just because people love him.
If he misses it, he misses it. And then we'll have Brunson, Dame, Garland as the guards plus 1 wild card because there's only 2 guards.
See, Derek has a pathway here. It's just a question of that consistency over this next month.
But he only has 1 spot right now, so let's go through it.
So who's vying for that spot?
I mean, Jalen's a backcourt guy in all-star sense, right?
I didn't realize they're so rigid with these.
I think that's how he's been voted in the past. So
Yeah.
at that point, we're talking about Melo, Mitchell as the starters, Brunson, Dame, Garland as the bench guards, and that leaves 1 spot. Jalen versus White. Again, it's
it'll
like
be
the
Jalen.
Olympic.
No, it'll be
It's like the
Jalen.
Olympic conversation.
Okay, so that's where we're at. This is eliminating Tyrese Maxey, right?
Yes,
Where's Trae Young in there? He's out.
that Young would be out. Is
Yo,
Young ahead of-
I thought there were more all-star spots. Now that we're actually doing this, I'm realizing maybe Derek White as an all-star was a little bit oh god, maybe this isn't good for my Pritchard take either. You know what I mean? I think we can expand the number of all-star spots.
That's been a conversation.
Yeah. It would be good for me.
Yeah, because we're booting a lot of good guys. Hero, Cade's a guard, right?
Oh, Hero's out?
Hero's out.
Let's circle up with this in a few weeks because I think that a lot of these guys are on the fringe, but it's making me realize, even despite all the injuries, we are...
So we need front court guys, so let's call Brown a front court guy.
I mean, they should put Brown in the front court just to make the game a little bit more balanced.
So who would you pick for the last guard spot at that point?
Between Tyler Hero...
Cade Cunningham, and White and Young.
I think you only have one spot for those four. I mean, not Derek White. Not because I don't want him to be, or I don't think he's... I mean, I think that... Well, first of all, I think we're not even weighing in the fact that he plays defense because I don't think that really plays into all-star voting, historically. Probably Cade Cunningham.
I like that answer.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Trae Young's having a good season. He's been so inefficient, though. We were looking, what is he shooting, 38% from the field?
And they haven't been great. They've been very mediocre.
They've been better than the Pistons.
Pistons have been better. I bet they have very similar records. But anyway,
But
here's
that's
White's
who's
path.
on the fringe right now, is those guys that are on the fringe.
Here's White's path. So Garland's in. Dame's in. Jalen's in. Whether that matters or not, we'll see. LaMelo out is an injury guy. At that
Who's in
point,
the
you get an
front
extra
court?
spot. We'll get to that.
Okay.
So LaMelo's out. Let's say Brunson moves in. Now you have an injury replacement. So there's 4 spots from that point on. Dame, Garland, Cade, and then you're down to White and Young. Maxey maybe at that point.
Yeah.
But Maxey's over White, right? If he plays to his capability.
He plays his capability, but what if White plays his capability, you know?
Still think Maxey surpasses that.
I mean, Max hasn't played great this year.
It's
And
true.
he's not an elite two-way player.
I think
I like Tyrese Maxey's game a lot, but he's had a little bit of a disappointing year so far.
I think what
And
we're getting
Philadelphia's
at, though,
7-15 also.
I think what we're getting at, though, is he's going to need 2 breaks to get in, probably.
Yeah.
More likely than not. And Young, we can have that debate, right? Best offensive player in this category versus best defender in this category. How that
But I also
shakes
would say
out.
if you're shooting 30% from the field, you're maybe not the best offensive player.
12.5 assists a game, though. That's it's a high number. Cam Thomas has been part of this conversation as well. I don't think he's going to stay in it. Poole, and we mentioned probably booting him. Maxey's going to be tough. LaMelo's going to be tough, too.
I wonder if we're missing anybody substantive. I don't think so.
Not that I can think of.
I'm realizing how guard-dominated the East is.
So let's get into the front court. Brown, let's say he's a front court guy. He should be a lock, right?
Brown, yeah. Giannis, a starter.
Well, yeah, we have them. So we have 2 more front court spots since we're not doing a front court wild card. We're talking Jalen Johnson, who you crossed off, I think, too quick.
Well, the Hawks aren't going to get 2 All-Stars.
Scotty Barnes, who's probably not going to be around at that point. Vucevic, who we mentioned. Mobley, Allen. Man, could the Cavs have 4 All-Stars?
I think they need to go positionless for All-Stars. You know?
Yeah.
I don't need no offense to DeAndre Jordan, but I don't need a DeAndre Jordan All-NBA.
Well, it's front court. It doesn't have to be a center.
I know, but it's clearly a guard-dominated situation here. I mean, Vucevic.
You're going to go with him?
I think he's having an All-Star season.
And then can we go Johnson? No, we got to go Mobley or Allen.
Yeah, Mobley.
Okay. I'm good with that. Mobley.
I think Evan Mobley, defensively also. I do think we need to start... We can't just say we want to value defense and then not... I think even if it's not realistic, defense should be a major factor here. It's half the game. And he's an elite defender. And we've seen that every time the Celtics have played the Cavs. When he's on the floor, it makes a tremendous difference.
So Jalen, Mobley, and Vucevic?
Yeah.
All right. So here's our team. LaMelo, Brunson. Well, Brunson's off the bench. Mitchell is the starter alongside LaMelo. Tatum, Giannis, Towns. And then we're going Dame, Garland, and Trae. Was Trae our last pick?
I think it's a little up for grabs right now between Trae and Tyler Hero. There's a couple of guys in there that I think just the next few weeks are going to help determine things, but damn, it's competitive.
Dame, Garland, Brunson, and you wanted Cade. So
I was kind of saying that for you. I know you wanted Cade. I was just
thanks
looking
for doing the work for me. there's our guards off the bench. Dame, Garland, Brunson, Cade. LaMelo could be an injury replacement. So at that point, you're talking Young, you're talking Hero, and you're talking White.
Yeah.
And Maxey.
Okay.
So those are the next up guys for reserve spots. And then our forwards / front court guys are going to be Brown, Vucevic. I don't know about that one.
I don't know about it either, but I mean, looking at the front court, there's not that many options.
And Mobley.
If Porzingis had been fully healthy this year, he'd actually be in the
He'd
running.
look like a slam dunk.
Yeah, because there's clearly... I honestly didn't realize that it was so positioned, like that's how restrictive the positions were.
Yeah, it's front court, back court, and then there's a couple wild cards. But
They
yeah,
gotta get rid of that. Basketball's too positionless at this point.
especially with the guards. And that's what they've done with all NBA at this
Right.
point, too, which I don't know. We'll see how that goes this year. I don't
And the
I don't
fact
know
that
about
both of the wings, both of last year's wild cards were guards, shows that obviously it was skewing guards.
All right, let's give a shout out to our other sponsor here, GameTime. We have a game coming up on Thursday as we record this, Celtics Pistons, and it's a rescheduled game. Celtics didn't make the cup, which we've talked plenty about here, spitefully in my case. But the positive here is you get a good midweek game that's super accessible. I've been looking at the prices to this game on GameTime. They're outstanding. And you can go over there. I'm sure people are going to try to offload them if maybe they add it to their season ticket package or whatever. They're just going to be trying to get off these tickets if they don't want to go to this game. So that's where the best options come in for all your tickets, whether it's Celtics, basketball, football. Still plenty of weeks left in the football season to go see the Patriots or whoever else you want to see. And you can do it on GameTime with the code CLNS. Get $20 off your first purchase when you go over there. Terms apply, but $20 off your first purchase over at GameTime. What do you get over there? All-in pricing. You get all kinds of zone and flash deals going on, and you get to see where you're sitting with panoramic views if it's not an area or section you're familiar with or an arena. So all that and more over at the GameTime app. Go download it today, and again, use that code CLNS for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. So some news that we got this week, a little from Noah as well. The big one, though, yesterday, Shams reporting that the Heat will listen to offers for Jimmy Butler, who has a huge player option next year. There's been some buzz that he could opt out of that and explore free agency. There's obviously been some tension between Butler and the organization, and they have not gotten off to a great start. Obviously, a week ago, losing to the Celtics, and pretty embarrassing effort without Butler in
Great
TD
week since,
Garden.
though.
Yes.
To be fair to Miami.
Beat the Lakers by 41. Some other good games along the way there. Butler did not comment after practice. I guess he normally doesn't talk after practice. And I don't know who would be interested in him. I started thinking, and I'm like, the Nets have been rumored for a while. I think that can make some sense if they want to pivot short term, but I don't know if they want to do that. And I've always liked the idea of him on the Warriors, and they've been star hunting, right? So I think that's a team you have to watch there. But I don't know how they would actually get that done. He's a big contract. He always has the ball in his hands. He's not a shooter. So what happens here? Does he just end up stuck in Miami for the rest of the year? Does someone swing a deal for him? Does he leave after this year? What's going to happen with Butler and those Heat?
So I think he's going to get traded.
This year?
I think so. Because, first of all, the conversations have started. I think already you've seen up and down levels of engagement from him. As soon as Pat Riley sat there and said that Jimmy shouldn't have spoken during the Celtics Heat series and kind of made him look bad, I was thinking to myself, like, this feels like the beginning of the end of this relationship. And obviously, they haven't been able to get that second star for him, or third star if you want to count Bam. And they haven't been able to really build a core that has been sustainable levels of winning, especially during the regular season. Like, they really haven't had good regular seasons despite the playoff runs. Jimmy's still a really good player. I honestly think that even though he has fallen off, so to speak, in the last year or two statistically, if you put him on a team where he doesn't have to do everything and he doesn't have to be the guy, like the Warriors, that's a scary team. I don't care about. I haven't even thought about the exactly how he would fit. And yeah, he doesn't shoot threes for the most part and all that. If you put Steph Curry and Jimmy Butler on the same team, that is the team I don't want the Celtics to play in the finals. I don't even care about what the correct basketball analysis is there. Purely from that personnel standpoint, those are two guys that I think would be formidable together, and I think the Warriors need another star alongside Curry. It makes a lot of sense. They're not a team that's I don't think they have enough right now to win it all with their current team, and I think they know that, and they've been pretty open about the fact that they're star hunting, that they have star hunted, and Jimmy's a guy who's not happy in a situation, and he's the report is that he has 3 trade destinations that he's interested in. It's Dallas, Golden State, and Houston. And to me, Golden State is like the perfect fit for him from that standpoint. And just their timeline makes sense too. Like they have older guys. Like they're not operating on a long-term scale. Houston to me is they're a little bit too young. Like they're not going to be a contender this season. They do have a lot of young talent. I don't know about the Warriors' assets and how they're perceived league-wide.
And I don't think they want to trade Kuminga. I think they're at a point where they see him as a
No, I think they want to
future
trade
piece,
Kuminga.
I don't know.
I follow too many Warriors accounts that think that this whole Kuminga hype thing right now that's happening is to just inflate his trade value, because Kuminga and the Warriors has been like up and down over the years. I think by now, if they felt like he was the guy, he would have a consistent role, he would have consistent minutes, he would be a starter. They don't have that confidence and faith in him, and he has a lot of limitations to his game, in my view. I'm not a huge Kuminga person, but I think that they want to raise his value right now because he would be a centerpiece of that type of trade.
And you're so desperate to stay in the mix here with Curry that you might look into that. And I don't know, he just extended him. I don't know if that prohibits him for a certain amount of time here, even for the whole season, but he would be the centerpiece of any deal. I can't think of any centerpiece in Dallas, and they obviously have 3 star guards already, so I don't think that's going to happen. The Nets, I'm not surprised they don't want to do it, but that's a story for another day. And Houston, they are intriguing because as much as they've talked about holding on to those assets and doing this naturally and growing and seeing how it goes this year, when Butler becomes available, we remember the KD thing when that started percolating over the summer. They started looking around and saying, what could we do here? And they have all those Suns picks that the Nets gave them to get their own picks back. So those are super valuable long-term picks that the Heat could acquire in that trade. So they would be the team that could get it done the easiest. They have a lot of different contracts that could go out. I don't know if it would just be, I know Dylan Brooks is signed for a while and so is Van Fleet, but you could send out a young guy, I don't think you want to trade Green, but you can look into either him or Şengün if you don't want to keep one of those guys long term. They're in a tough spot because I do think they want to be patient, but that's something, I mean, they've gotten up to like 2 in the West at this point in a certain part of this year. So I don't know if you feel like they're a legitimate contender, but Butler goes there and he plays to his level into the playoffs, and he's such an Ime guy too, right? Like I think Ime would be dying for a guy like that.
I can so see that culture fade. I mean, his list of 3 teams did not surprise me. There are 3 teams that are contenders.
I love him in Golden State too. He can do some Draymond stuff.
For him and for them, ball. Not for Boston. So I don't like that.
There's the question. Would the Warriors suddenly be right up there with Boston among the championship contenders if they got Butler?
I don't think so. I mean, honestly, I'm half joking here when I say about how scary a team with Curry and Jimmy would be. I don't ever think that a blockbuster trade like that, you can now elevate a team to a contender status without actually seeing them on the floor, because we've seen how many times on paper things look great and then you put the pieces together and 9 times out of 10 they don't actually pan out the way that we expect them to. It's unusual to happen what happened with Boston. It really is. Normally you see Devin Booker and Bradley Beal and Kevin Durant and it's not working, or you see Paul George and Joel Embiid and Tyrese Maxey and they're all hurt. Like, that's a much more likely scenario, and so I like them on paper. I like the idea of it. I can see it panning out. I see a world where all of a sudden it's a final series and Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry are taking turns hitting daggers. Like, I can picture it, but that doesn't mean that on a basketball level it will actually work.
Yep, and I think they could get to the finals with Butler there, and that's where you get, because I think they play you about as well as anyone in the league, and it'd be an enormously challenging series, but I do think the odds are against it because it's so hard to get out of the West. Like, even with Butler, I think the odds would be against them getting out of the West compared to a Thunder, who look amazing, and some other teams out there. So I don't think it would alter the championship conversation too much, specifically if you went to Houston, because like you said, I think they're too early in this process, and they'd be losing a cornerstone guy while bringing in Butler, and I think that's the biggest reason that that's not going to happen. If you're right about Kuminga, that Warriors thing probably will happen, and that should at least raise your eyebrows or your antenna if you're a Celtics fan, saying, all right, Warriors are really in the mix now. They obviously came to Boston and beat you early this year with a super impressive performance, but how healthy can Curry stay? How healthy can the rest of that roster? If they had to bench Draymond, it still doesn't really know what they want to do rotation-wise yet. So there's a lot going on there, and they've played much worse of late. So again,
they're going to be on the market. They're going to be looking at options.
And he's a great option, I think. And you see how that contract goes next year. I think it would make all the sense in the world for him to opt in and the Warriors to have a 2-year setup with him because he's getting old.
With Jimmy?
Yep.
Yeah.
And so I think that if you had that assurance that he was going to opt in next year, it would make you all the more likely to do it. But huge story. That would obviously be the end of the Heat.
It's very intriguing, yeah.
I think it's right for the Heat to reset, get a piece like Kuminga, get picks, and start to build this thing up again.
I don't think Kuminga's a guy you want long term because he can't shoot.
But if he has playing time, if he has the ability to just play through it, Hero and Bam are still there, I don't think it'd be long before the Heat would be back on their feet. So I think it's time. They're not going anywhere this year, and I think that's pretty clear. And I've talked about it a bunch with the guy who covers them, Wes Goldberg. I think there's nothing wrong with doing a reset. This isn't a full rebuild. Get some good pieces. Build around Bam, build around Hero, go younger. They're so good at developing young players.
Right.
So I think that's the move for Miami there. This Butler thing's over. A couple more topics I want to get into before we get out of here. You reported up in Maine that Jordan Walsh wanted to play that one-off in Maine. It wasn't an assignment. It wasn't going to be something that's going forward for him. And we'll see what his role ends up being here. It relates to Sam Hauser's injury, which he's still questionable to play Celtics Pistons with the adductor injury that disrupted them in an underrated way in that Memphis game.
Absolutely.
So they've tried to get some stuff from Peterson. They didn't use Peterson in that Memphis game. They went double big instead. Shireman still doesn't seem like an option here. And Walsh has had a difficult season offensively since he's been with Boston for the most part to begin this year. But he goes up to Maine and shoots 3 of 7 from 3,
And he looked
8 of 12
great.
from the field. Leads them back in it. They almost win. He's coming off the bench, but he's playing big minutes in the second half. It was awesome. So I don't know if he has anything else to gain from more main stints this year, but he does seem willing to do it if it's necessary. Is he going to be there more often this year, or are we going to see him factor more into what Boston's doing?
I don't think he's going to be there very long. Baylor, on the other hand, did say that he thinks he's staying for a little. So he said he really packed his bags, and he's going to be in Maine quite a bit. So I don't know if I reported that yet, but yeah, he's going to be there for a sec. So Jordan, to me, it seemed like I was kind of laughing. Somebody wrote this on my article, but they said you and Jordan have the same mindset of if you have an off day, it's like you may as well just go up to Maine. And I was like, that is kind of true because there was obviously the 5 games in 7 days. I think he was not playing, but he was obviously, it's a full day commitment to be on the roster. But I think he just loves basketball like everybody else, and he wants to play. And he mentioned that at practice the day before, he had kind of come over to the player development staff, and he was kind of bugging them about playing. And then Brad called him, and Brad was like, "You really want to play? Like, you really want to go up to Maine?" And he was like, "Yeah, I don't want to just sit here. Like, I want to go up to Maine." So he came. The crowd was so excited to see him. They love him up there. He's such a fan favorite for understandable reasons. He's an exciting player, and he was on that team all year last year, as we know. And I thought that that was the best I've ever seen him look in Maine, and that was encouraging because I think it was a win-win for him. He could have gone up there and not looked great, and it wouldn't have really mattered ultimately. Like, it's not the end of the world.
It shows what he's capable of.
Yeah, but it also shows that he's grown because we had a pretty substantial sample with him in Maine last year. He wasn't as decisive. You could tell that there were moments where he was overthinking the game. He wasn't processing at the level that he's processing now, and his defense was a lot better.
So why is he struggling in Boston when he's getting these spot opportunities?
Because I think it's hard. You're coming in. You don't know what minutes you're going to play. You don't know if you're going to have any touches. You might go 0 for 2. And most of these offensive numbers are the accumulation of a bunch of 0 for 2 nights. Like, that's the truth. Mm-hmm. And you can't really assess somebody's capabilities as a shooter.
Yeah, I've been less concerned about the numbers and more the teams aren't guarding him. He hasn't been super aggressive in beating.
They're not guarding him because look at the Celtics team.
Yeah.
They didn't guard Jrue Holiday the other day, and he came off he was the best 3-point shooter in the league last year.
So can you just not play him because other teams aren't going to guard him?
I think it's just a matter of, like, he has to build his confidence at a certain point, and right now the sample is too small to say he's a 0 on offense or a negative on offense because teams aren't guarding him because why would anybody guard any of these guys? I wouldn't guard Drew Peterson if I were an opposing team.
Tillman's gotten lost.
I wouldn't guard any of these guys. I mean, we just talked about it. Drew is not getting guarded. Jalen didn't get guarded last year. Like, teams are coming to play Boston and they're desperate. They don't know how they can get out of the situation. They're looking at their rosters. We talk to coaches pregame all the time, and there's always some question around how do you guard this team, and they're always kind of like, you try. Like, that's the answer. And so you're going to do the little gimmicky things of leaving guys open. And Jordan, to me, it's a no-brainer to leave him open. But in Maine, they don't leave him open. And in Maine, he was very confident, off the dribble, shooting pull-ups, shooting spot-ups, and you can just see that there's a level of comfort that just wasn't there a year ago. So he's going to continue to get better. He's going to continue to get more comfortable. What his ceiling is as an NBA player, I'm really not sure, because I think a lot of my confidence and belief in a guy like Pritchard is that I've seen him be one of the best players in the country before. Like, he was that his senior year in college. Jordan is on such a different trajectory. It's all about development. It's all about taking his raw physical tools and turning him into an NBA player. And it's not something that he's shown before, but it's something that we have to kind of envision that he can be. But I thought that story was nice, that he wanted on his off day to drive up to Maine and to go play 30 minutes where he could have looked bad. He could have played poorly, and then it's like, why did you do that? You could have just enjoyed your day off.
So yeah. if Hauser can't go tomorrow, he tried to go through practice today, and they didn't go with Peterson, Walsh, or Shireman in that Memphis game. They went with double big. Wanted some offensive rebounding, so I think it was unique circumstances. But do we start to see those reserve depth? Obviously, it's not going to be Shireman, but Peterson, Walsh, are they going to get another chance to fill a depth wing spot here, you think? Maybe even as soon as tomorrow?
Yeah, I think either one of those guys. Honestly, I've tried to figure this out. I've asked Joe about it. I couldn't really determine why Walsh has gotten some opportunities and why Peterson has. My impression of it is that Walsh had his chances and didn't do a whole lot, as we said. And so, why not just mix it up and give it to a guy that's been working hard?
I thought Peterson should have played against Memphis. Maybe they didn't want to just throw him in late. I don't know what that was all about.
He looks more confident offensively.
Absolutely.
Than Walsh does right now. And he's also 4 years older than him, and I think you can see that at moments. Even defensively. He just has a level of composure about him. And so I'd probably put Peterson over Walsh right now. He didn't play great in Maine, actually. He actually kind of struggled.
Especially if he's replacing Hauser, because you're trying to have some interchangeable skills there, right? So I could definitely see that being the way it goes if it is going to happen against Detroit. Unfortunately, there's more time off here for Hauser to get this right. I think you want him right. I think you want him being back to himself when he does come back. So if he misses Thursday, get Friday and Saturday off, and then Celtics are in Washington on Sunday. So pretty light week. We want to get in the studio, talk to you guys, try it live, and I think it worked out well here. So we'll be back maybe every week or so here, try to do some bigger topics, some stuff going on around the league, maybe even some pregame shows before the games here tonight, because we want to talk about some other stuff outside of the games, and it's tough to squeeze that in sometimes. So check out Noah's article over on CelticsBlog.com about Walsh. I have a Nemesh Keita piece going up over there as well right now, and some more stuff to come later today on CLNSmedia.com as well. So follow along with all our coverage. Subscribe, CLNS Media, Celtics All Access. Jalen and Joe talked at practice today, so you can go see what they had to say. And we'll be back for Celtics Pistons on Thursday. Unfortunately, it's not the Cup. We'd be in New York right now, Noah.
I have to just say, though, earlier when you were talking about the game time, if you want to go to a cheap NBA game, the NBA Cup has actually created a pathway for that, because every year, last year too, it was against New York. These makeup games are the first time where you can actually afford tickets. So there's a nice plus here is that there's tickets for regular people.
And Washington, you want to go down to Washington? You're already there. We know there's a lot of Celtics fans there, so those will be super affordable.
This is the week for cheap Celtics tickets.
But I'd still rather be in New York for Celtics Knicks tonight. But instead, we'll get Hawks, Knicks. A lot of great Cup action going on through the end of the week here. Thunder moved on last night. Bucks beat the Magic in a rock fight. So they're going to advance to play the winner of Knicks Hawks in that East final out in Vegas. And the Thunder will host either the Rockets or Warriors. So some great games coming up here. Celtics got their rest, and they're going to be back at it tomorrow night, and we will be there. And that's it for our live studio edition of the Garden Report. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
It's all about showing up to play hard, doing what it takes to win.
They were so good, and they might be better.
More Luke?
He's your third center.
Bobby, we gave you Luke hour early. We are not going to end this on a damn conversation about Luke